Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so the week after the Pope's funeral. Wow, it's really brought some global tensions into sharp focus, hasn't it?
It really has. Feels like several simmering plots are starting to boil over simultaneously.
Exactly. And you flagged three key areas we need to dig into. First, Ukraine and Russia, but with this new Trump angle that's emerged. Then the situation between Iran and the U.S. and Israel. Always tense, but maybe escalating?
Definitely seems that way, yeah.
And finally, something maybe not getting as much headline space, but potentially terrifying. The India-Pakistan standoff looks like a nuclear powder keg.
It really does. Extremely worrying.
So we've got your articles, your notes here. The plan is to, unpack these, get past the surface level, see what's really critical, and maybe how these things connect. Mookie Tenenbaum and Horacio Kabak have been following this closely.
Absolutely. It's crucial to understand the details in each case, I think. The history, the current politics, it's all feeding into a pretty volatile global picture right now. Lots of potential for missteps.
Okay, let's dive in. Eastern Europe first. Ukraine, Russia, and former President Trump. He met with Zelensky at the Vatican, right?
He did.
And he seems convinced, really convinced, that he can personally hammer out a peace deal.
That's definitely the message he's putting out. What's striking, though, is his apparent take on why there isn't peace yet.
Right. Your analysis, Tenenbaum, points to him sort of seeing Zelensky or maybe Ukraine's whole position as the main obstacle.
Exactly. It seems to underpin his strategy, this idea that if Ukraine just concedes certain things, peace is achievable. Think about his earlier comments suggesting Crimea, that it's basically Russian now.
Yeah, like Ukraine should just accept the 2014 annexation as reality.
Precisely. These gestures towards Putin may be trying to build some goodwill, but Putin's response, it wasn't exactly effusive, was it? Just that very short Easter truce.
Hardly a major concession.
No. And this approach, it aligns with a certain realist view, prioritizing big power deals over maybe sovereign rights. It's a strategy with a very mixed track record, historically speaking.
And now he's brought in this guy, Vitkov, a New York real estate negotiator.
Yeah, the same one reportedly used in discussions involving Hamas previously.
Yeah.
An expert in, let's say, tough negotiations.
Okay. But Vitkov met with Zelensky, and apparently Zelensky felt, the reports used pretty strong language. Like, he felt Putin was stringing him along, taking him by the nose.
Or even bullshitting, according to some accounts.
Yeah.
Yeah, it paints a picture of deep distrust there in Kiev, quite different from the optimism Trump seems to be projecting.
It really does, and it highlights the clash in styles too, doesn't it? Trump and Zelensky are out there talking, but
Putin's different. Much more reserved, publicly.
Yeah.
His background, KGB, it points towards actions speaking louder than words, fewer prepared statements, more calculated moves.
And then you have Medvedev making all the really harsh statements.
Right. Some analysts see that as a deliberate tactic, yeah. Makes Putin look relatively moderate by comparison, perhaps.
Okay, but here's the twist. While Trump's making these apparent peace overtures, maybe offering concessions like Crimea, he's also threatening Russia with major sanctions. Secondary sanctions, banking sanctions. Can you break those down for us, Kabak?
Sure. So secondary sanctions are the big stick here. Right now, the U.S. isn't buying Russian oil, but countries like India, China, they still are.
Mm-hmm.
Secondary sanctions would hit anyone globally still doing business with designated Russian entities, like buying their oil, cut them off from the U.S. financial system, the U.S. market. That's a huge deterrent.
So it could actually shrink the market for Russian oil.
It could. Paradoxically, maybe even make it cheaper for the few buyers willing to take the risk. It forces countries like India and China into a tough calculation.
Then banking sanctions?
Even tougher. That aims to cut Russian banks, and potentially any banks dealing with them, right out of the global financial system. SWIFT, international transfers, trade finance. It all gets incredibly difficult, if not impossible.
So serious threats.
Extremely potent tools. But they need international buy-in to be fully effective, and there's always the risk of broader economic fallout. It does make you wonder if Putin is maybe underestimating Trump's willingness to actually pull that trigger.
Okay, let's shift focus. The Middle East, Iran, the U.S., Israel. It always feels like it's on a knife edge there. What's the latest?
Well, interestingly, you see a similar pattern with Trump's approach, perhaps. A real drive for a negotiated win, a big diplomatic achievement. It's different from, say, the military intervention some previous administrations leaned towards.
He wants a deal.
He seems to.
Yeah.
He might see Iran's internal pressures as leverage. But, like we just discussed with Russia, there's the risk Iran reads that eagerness as maybe weakness on the U.S. side.
And right in the middle of this massive explosion at Bandar Abbas, that's a huge port for Iran, right? Oil, chemicals.
Vital. And possibly missile fuel components, too. Reports mentioned thousands of tons of fuel exploding, significant casualties, a major incident.
Iran called it an accident.
They did. But the timing, right when these sensitive negotiations are supposedly happening, it immediately fuels speculation. Could it have been something else? Maybe aimed at disrupting the talks?
And Israel. They denied involvement, which you noted was unusual for them.
Very unusual. Their usual playbook is ambiguity, never confirm, never deny. So an explicit denial. It's noteworthy. Maybe they genuinely weren't involved. Or maybe they really don't want to be seen derailing U.S. efforts right now. Either way, it adds another layer of uncertainty.
Especially with the nuclear issue always lurking in the background. Can you give us a quick refresher on where things stand, the Obama deal, the enrichment?
Sure. So Iran's been enriching uranium for years, saying it's for peaceful power. But that same process is key for weapons. The Obama deal, the JCPOA, put strict limits on how much and how pure they could enrich.
But the U.S. pulled out of that.
Right. And since then, Iran's ramped things up. They're now enriching up to 60% purity. Now, weapons grade's about 90%, but that jump from 60% to 90%, technically it's not the hardest part.
How long could that take?
Experts estimate it could be just a matter of weeks. That's the breakout time. How fast they could theoretically produce enough material for one bomb. It's getting shorter.
And the U.S. position is still basically zero Iranian enrichment.
That's the stated goal. Maybe allowing third parties to supply fuel for civilian reactors, but no domestic enrichment by Iran. Negotiations have happened, a third round recently, but reports, like in the Wall Street Journal, suggest the U.S. side is still pretty skeptical about reaching a deal Iran would accept.
It feels incredibly tense. And Iran has missiles too, right? A lot of them.
Estimates suggest they have fuel stockpiled for something like 3,000 missiles. That capability, combined with a shrinking nuclear breakout time, it's why Israel is so deeply concerned.
Understandably, they see a nuclear Iran as an existential threat.
Absolutely. Given Iran's rhetoric about Israel's right to exist, well, you can see why Israel might feel forced into considering a preemptive strike on nuclear facilities if they think Iran is about to cross the threshold.
And there was talk of a deadline. Trump setting a 60-day window for talks.
That was reported, yes. Along with a suggestion that the U.S. would be prepared to lead military action if diplomacy failed within that time frame. High stakes.
What about other players? Russia? China? Europe?
Russia's an ally of Iran, but seems focused elsewhere, maybe Ukraine. China's been surprisingly quiet on this specific negotiation track. And Europe, well, they're involved, but seem to have limited clout right now to really shape the outcome.
You also highlighted Grossi, the IAEA.
Yes, Rafael Grossi. He's been incredibly outspoken, very direct in warning how close Iran is getting, weeks or months, depending on the assessment. He's a key figure, very credible, and his strong stance has even led some to mention him as a possible future UN Secretary General.
Definitely someone to watch. Okay, one more flashpoint. India and Pakistan. You suggested this might actually be the most dangerous situation right now, even if it's not getting the same headlines. Why?
Well, you have to start with the history. The partition in 1947, just horrific violence, mass displacement, it created this deep-seated animosity that's never really gone away. Multiple wars since then.
And the alliances have shifted over time, too, haven't they?
They have. Pakistan was historically closer to the U.S. and China, India closer to the Soviets, Russia. Now, it's almost flipped. India's much closer to the U.S. Pakistan is leaning heavily on China. So you can even see this regional rivalry as part of the bigger U.S.-China competition now.
And the flashpoint is always Kashmir.
Almost always. Divided territory, Muslim majority on the Indian side, persistent source of conflict, terrorism, separatist movements. And this recent attack, terrorists killing Indian tourists in Kashmir, reportedly backed by Pakistan. That seems to have triggered a really sharp reaction from Modi.
What's he done?
It's been quite dramatic. Cut diplomatic ties, closed the border, kicked out Pakistani visitors, used very strong language. But the really alarming move is suspending the Indus Waters Treaty.
The Water Treaty. Explain that.
Okay, this treaty from 1960 is critical. It governs how the waters of the Indus River system, which mostly originate in or flow through India, are shared with Pakistan. Pakistan is hugely dependent on that water. Something like 80% of its agriculture relies on it.
So cutting off the water
is basically threatening mass famine in Pakistan. It's an existential threat for them.
And Pakistan's response?
They've threatened war if India actually tries to block the water. Flat out threatened war.
And both sides have nuclear weapons.
Exactly. Both India and Pakistan are nuclear powers. Neither signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. We don't really know the exact size or readiness of their arsenals. A nuclear exchange between them, it's almost unthinkable. Catastrophic casualties, environmental disaster, truly terrifying potential.
Yet the world seems quiet.
Disturbingly so. The U.S. hasn't commented publicly, though maybe there's quiet support for Modi pushing back on terrorism. China, surprisingly, also silent despite its ties in the region. Iran offered to mediate, but that was basically ignored.
So the Pope's funeral, Ukraine, everyone's looking elsewhere.
It seems that way. This incredibly dangerous situation fueled by historical grievances, nationalism, religious fervor, and now this water crisis layered on top of the nuclear threat. It's just not getting the intense international focus you'd expect. The risk of miscalculation is enormous.
So pulling these three threads together, Ukraine, Russia, Trump, Iran, US, Israel, and India, Pakistan, what are the big takeaways here? What should we really be watching?
I think first it highlights how individual leaders, like Trump, with unconventional approaches, can really inject uncertainty and volatility into global affairs. His desire for deals is clear, but the methods are risky.
Okay.
Second, the Iran nuclear situation is genuinely critical. They are getting very close to a capability threshold, and the potential for conflict, either preemptive or miscalculated, is very high.
And the third?
India-Pakistan. It's arguably the most immediate risk of a large-scale, potentially nuclear conflict right now. The water issue has raised the stakes dramatically, and it needs far more urgent international attention than it's getting.
It's a sobering picture. Complex, interconnected, incredibly fragile. It really makes you think. Given all this, what assumptions we used to hold about global stability maybe just don't apply anymore, and what other conflicts might be simmering just below the radar, ready to blow up? Lots to think about. Thank you, Kabak, for walking us through this.
My pleasure. Definitely situations that demand ongoing scrutiny.